Unfortunately, for a lot of companies, the first time they find out that their plans don't work or their people aren't prepared is when they get into a real crisis. That's a multi-million dollar mistake, or can be a multi-million dollar mistake.
So the thing about working in crises is that it makes a whole set of activities which are already really difficult, things like setting strategic objectives, holding structured meetings, setting a good and solid strategy, that are already hard, even harder.
The fallacies and misunderstandings about live exercises, they just aren't important, and people don't really have the time for them at all. Whereas actually they really are important, and they're really useful because it gets you out and it gets you practicing, and it gets people and different agencies working together in a really, really key way that is very important during an actual live incident.
If we're all sitting around a coffee table casually drinking coffee, and we start talking about how we would manage an incident when it happens, it can all sound quite intuitive, but of course when the phones start ringing and social media is going viral and people are demanding answers you don't have yet, it's a completely different set of circumstances.
We have some organisations that we work with that have a high turnover of staff, not necessarily that they're leaving the company, but they may be changing responsibilities, geographies. So I think whenever a key person out of that team moves, that should be a trigger to start looking at that planning again and rehearsing desktop exercises. Whereas you might have smaller organisations that may only need an exercise each year. So I think it really depends on the organisation that we're dealing with.
We did an exercise recently, didn't we? And it makes the company realise that actually they need to empower their staff to be able to answer the questions.
The crawl phase would really just be looking at people's roles and responsibilities and spending time with them individually. Do they understand what they're expected to do within a crisis? And then when you get to the sort of desktop exercises, that's a very light touch. You're kind of hand-holding them through the exercise. And that is a time for sort of question and answers and making sure everybody's very comfortable of what's expected of them.
Generally what we would advise is that if you have a team that hasn't had much opportunity to either deal with incidents and crises in real life, or if they haven't had the chance to practice, that actually throwing them into a really highly pressured and immersive exercise can be quite challenging and actually could damage confidence. So you may start off with something that's a bit more discussion based, maybe a desktop exercise where you can get people who are in the room, you can get them to talk around scenarios that could impact them. And then after time you can build up the pressure. So as the teams get more and more mature and they get more used to what it's like working under pressure, then you can really build up into what we would call full simulation exercises. And that's where we really create the pressure and where you ultimately take a crisis team through a crisis for a day. And that would be where you have simulated stakeholders who are calling into the team, you've got journalists, you've got media clips that are playing, and it really does feel like you're in a crisis.
Exercising should all be about learning and development. I very hesitatingly ever use the word test because it just induces a different reaction from participants. So if you're going to exercise, have a really clear objective. What is it you're trying to get out of it? What is it you're trying to develop, and what behaviours are you trying to sort of induce in the participants? And with that in mind, what level of training have they already had? So we could create an exercise that is pretty sure to fail, and nobody's going to really learn from that. They're just going to feel really awkward. And when you want buy-in over the next year, over the next 2 years, or when it comes to real emergencies and crisis, then what you want to do is gain that trust.
And then, as you say, you go on to the full-scale simulated exercises to make sure that actually they've learnt everything they should have done and that they're confident. And if they're not, you go back to the desktop phase again and you keep building up their confidence.
One of the objectives should be team building. teamwork. We could pay and we could go off and do something else for a day or 2 days, but actually running an exercise that has an element of reality but allows them, a really safe learning environment. People will gel if it's been done well together. If they've been engaged. Another big part of that and preparing the exercise is making sure that you're not going to have 6 people in the room who have got nothing to do. They don't have anything to contribute. So when you're planning those scenarios, think about the whole team, and it means you do have to spend a bit of time getting to know that team, or working with a coordinator who knows that team. But one of the big objectives should be to gel that team, to create that positive team working environment.
Simulations offer a really interesting platform for allowing us to run research, but they also allow us to offer training for the participants as well. So often I'll phrase or kind of frame my research around running it as having research needs, so me manipulating some variables, for example the goals that we might ask them to use, or maybe I'll measure some things on individual differences, so personality for example. But at the same time, the people taking part in the simulation can use it for training. So I can provide them specific organisational feedback on things they're interested in. If we run it multiple times, we can actually get everybody back in a room together in a debrief, and we can get them to trade off the decisions that they make.
So during an exercise, it can be a stressful environment for the participants involved, and a time when people feel like they're under pressure at the same time with all of their peers. So from our perspective, we try and take some of the pressure out of that situation by making firstly the exercise feel as realistic as possible, so they don't have that time to think about it feeling like a simulation, and also we try and make sure that our observations and recommendations are handled in a sympathetic way. Often it's people's first time practicing their incident role, and what we will try and do is make sure that we have very detailed root cause analysis of what happened at what time during the exercise and what decisions and rationale were undertaken, to try and make sure that we can debrief in as objective a way as possible.
It really does feel like you're in a crisis, and it starts to invoke that kind of emotive response of how you work under pressure and how you work under stress. And then you start to build that muscle memory of what that actually feels like. So that if that does happen, you start to get used to how you can start regaining control over the rational side of your brain. Because when you're working under pressure, what happens is that there's part of your brain that hijacks the other bit of your brain that actually helps you to plan and to rationalise.
The bar's really high for us in terms of creating credible and engaging exercises that are different to the kind of classroom-based mandatory training and exercising they've had before.
Nowadays, social media is so important, and it's so instant when an incident happens, that actually if you don't put that in, people ignore it and they don't realise how important it is. But companies have gone under because of social media during an incident. So the fact that we can actually replicate that in a tabletop is so key, because it gives them that sort of realism and that need to respond to things that if they were in a real incident, they would suddenly go, oh yeah, I remember doing that. We really need to get on top of getting the media messages out, the Twitter messages out, and making sure that they're on top of that comms.
Why do you want an exercise? Is it to validate your plan? Is it to train your people? And often unpicking that, we really want to try and develop with an organisation training and exercising programme where the exercise that may be externally led and supported is just one part of their overall readiness. And so the exercise doesn't sit as one item on their programme, but as part of a longer term schedule.
A lot of organisations see tabletop exercise and rehearsing as more and more important. The issue is, from my perspective, that they see it as a one-off event. It's something that you do in one afternoon and then you carry on. From my perspective, training, exercising and validation, which are the 3 stages of an exercise program, should be ongoing and inbuilt into every aspect of an organisation's capability development program. And if an organisation has as its base and its heart a culture of continuous improvement, then that affects not just the specific aspects of the training that it is doing, but it impacts on every aspect of them as an organisation.
If you've got a crisis management team and leaders who want to see the exercise and the scenario before they do it, you've got a problem with trust and confidence. and that might be something you have to address before you do the exercise. How often are we aware of all of the facts and how it's going to play out and what it's going to look like before we get there? So I think if you're a crisis manager, if you're in those coordinator positions and resilience, business continuity, just be brave enough to have those conversations. So trust me, I will give you a really good exercise and you will learn from it. I'm not going to show you it. I'm not going to run through that with you before you do it. Otherwise, you know, the development and the learning is diminished somewhat. Be innovative and try something new and don't be afraid to do it. So how does a crisis really, how would it go through your organisation? Would it just wait for the crisis to happen? The reality is we would have potentially situational updates. We might be watching something happen for a week, for 48 hours, for 24 hours before we stand up a response to it. That's how our escalation process works. So if you're going to exercise a crisis team, start it 2 days before, 48 hours, 24 hours. Give them a little feed that says, oh, there's something happening. You know, these are the actions that are being taken. These are the comms lines that are being prepared. Impact so far is sort of minimal. Start to simulate the crisis before we just go in the room at 10 o'clock in the morning and then we finish it at 12 o'clock. It's not reflective of reality. And similarly to that, don't be stuck and rigid to a 2-3 hour period. If you want to do 3 1-hour periods over a day or over a period of days, that might be really reflective. Get teams to hand over. So start with one crisis team and then hand over to the deputised team or de-escalate. You know, see how that works and how they carry on with your processes.
In my mind, there is no question about it, but there will be a differential between organisations that do have training and exercising at their heart and those that don't.